Good evening. My name is Tim Neff, and I'm the Vice President and Director of Museum and Education at Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hall and Museum. Soldiers and Sailors is a nonprofit organization located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which stands as a unique memorial dedicated to honoring the men and women of all branches of service from all generations of conflicts. I would like to welcome you to our Spotlight On program this evening and thank everyone for virtually joining us. Soldiers and Sailors will be providing more Spotlight On programs like this in the evening of the second Thursday of each month. I will talk a little bit more about that at the end of tonight's program, but you can always visit our website for more information, soldiersandsailorshall.org. In honor of Women's History Month tonight's program will focus on nurses in the military. I think it is important to share a brief note about Women's History Month, which traces its origins back to a movement that began in 1908 in New York City, when thousands of women united and marched for better labor laws, working conditions, and the right to vote. This evolved into International Women's Day, which was formally accepted in numerous countries on March 8, 1911. Over time, the movement in the United States continued to evolve, and in 1978, it was expanded to a week-long series of events to celebrate the often overlooked contributions of women to the United States history, culture, and society. In 1980, President Jimmy Carter declared the week of March 8th as Women's History Week. And in 1987, Congress expanded the observation to include the entire month of March. As for tonight, the format of the program will be a panel discussion. And let me point out that after we hear from our panelists, there will be a Q&A session. If you have any questions, please submit a comment on Facebook, or if you're watching on YouTube, please email your question to soldiersandsailorspittsburgh@gmail.com. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce the panel that we have assembled for the program. First off, we will welcome Donna Gardner, who is a retired commander in the United States Navy Nurse Corps. Second, we will hear from Jake Wynn, who is the Director of Interpretation at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. And third, we'll have Michael Kraus, who is the Curator of Collections here at Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hall and Museum. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our first panelist, Donna Gardner, who will be speaking about her experience in the military and her post-military career. A native of Freeport, Pennsylvania, Donna graduated from the University of Pittsburgh in 1977 with a Bachelor of Science in Nursing. In January of 1978, she received her commission in the United States Navy Nurse Corps and began her military career at Naval Regional Medical Center, Portsmouth, Virginia. Donna spent the next 22 years in assignments through the United States and Japan, ranging from staff nurse to nurse recruiter to staff development officer to director of branch medical clinics. Along the way, she was selected for the Navy Graduate Education Program and attended East Carolina University, where she received her Master of Science in Nursing as an adult health clinical nurse specialist. She retired from the Naval Medical Clinic in Charleston, South Carolina in 2000, where she then became a health educator to military beneficiaries. In 2003, she returned to Pennsylvania and accepted a faculty position at St. Margaret's School of Nursing, where she taught in the RN and LPN programs for 10 years. She retired in 2013 and lives in Freeport with her husband, Stephen. Thank you, Donna, and take it away.
Thank you, Tim, for that warm introduction. And good evening, folks. As Tim said, my name is Donna Gardner, and I'm honored to be here for Soldiers and Sailors Spotlight on Female Nurses in the Military as part of Women's History Month. For my part, I was asked to provide an overview of my military career as a Navy Nurse Corps officer, from why I joined to some of my experiences while serving, to a few of the benefits I've realized based on my 22-year Navy career, which is hard to fit into 15 minutes. My experience as a Navy nurse are unique to me, but are fairly typical career path. If you've ever talked with other nurses who've served in the military, you may hear some similarities, but their stories will be different from mine depending on where, when, and with whom they served. However, what we all share is a sense of patriotism, professionalism, adventure, and unmatched camaraderie. The contributions of women are an essential part of American military history and certainly a component of Women's History Month. Women have been a part of every conflict from colonial times to the present, and both Jake and Michael will provide more detailed information from the historical perspective in just a few moments. But here's just a bit of an intro for me. Today's Nurse Corps officers of the Army, Navy, and Air Force serve in hundreds of duty stations worldwide in numerous specialties, both clinical and administrative. Branch of the military, it does not have its own medical personnel, and members of the Navy Medical Department provide their health care. Regarding professional aspects of nursing, military nurses are responsible for care of active duty and retirees, along with their families and other people in need across the globe. Active duty Navy nurses may be stationed on more than 250 Navy and military medical facilities, as well as on board ships and with the Marines on the ground. Navy nurses also provide care aboard Navy hospital ships, the Comfort and Mercy. And in fact, to support the humanitarian need during the COVID-19 pandemic, you may have seen these ships and their staff, including Navy nurses, deployed to New York and Los Angeles last March. And currently, military medical personnel from all branches are out there right now providing COVID-19 vaccinations throughout the country. There are over 4,000 active duty and reserve nurses serving in the United States Navy Nurse Corps in 17 different specialty areas, and there are over 200 new nurses that join the Corps each year. So now for my story. Coming from Western Pennsylvania as a daughter of a World War II veteran, I love to listen to the war stories told by my dad and his twin brother, and it instilled in me a strong sense of patriotism. Well, in my last semester in the BSN program at the University of Pittsburgh, I was considering job options for after graduation when one of my classmates told me she was joining the Navy Nurse Corps, and it really piqued my interest. She connected me with her recruiter, who then arranged an introductory tour to the Naval Hospital in Jacksonville, Florida, for a firsthand look at what Navy nursing was all about. Well, from that trip forward, I was hooked. Now, not to sell the other services short, I interviewed with the Army and the Air Force nurse recruiters, and I found that each offered similar opportunities for professional nursing. But what really sold me on the Navy was the locations of the naval hospitals, primarily near the ocean or water, and I especially liked the Navy uniforms. So after graduation, I submitted my application to the Navy Nurse Corps, but while awaiting a decision, I worked as a staff nurse at Presbyterian Hospital. When I received my Navy acceptance, I met with my charge nurse to tell her my plans, and she said she had just 2 words for me. Well, I thought she was going to say, "Don't go," or "That's crazy," but she simply said, "Do it." So with her encouragement and the blessing of my parents, I began my Navy career in January of 1978, which was a long time ago. My first stop was Officer Indoctrination School, or OIS, in Newport, Rhode Island. Today it's called Officer Development School, but the purpose is the same. As a nurse, I already had a profession, and this 5-week program provided me with an introduction to the responsibilities of Staff Nurse Corps officers who support the fleet. The content included the military structure of the Navy and the history, traditions, and customs, leadership development, and military etiquette. My first duty station was at the Naval Medical, where I was a staff nurse, first on the 3rd Open Medicine Ward on a similar ward. Both of these units allowed me to further develop my clinical skills, plus focus on leadership and management and training of the hospital core staff. In addition to the traditional nursing roles, there were occasional special assignments that provided unique exposure to Navy life. As a lieutenant junior grade, I was selected for one such assignment as the senior officer to accompany 5 ensign medical students on their shipboard orientation tour. The 6 of us were assigned to the USS Savannah, an auxiliary oil replenisher out of Norfolk, Virginia. We were on board for 10 days and sailed to Florida, where the ship served as an observation platform for dignitaries to watch the new Polaris missile launch off a submarine. One of our distinguished guests was Zbigniew Brzezinski, the National Security Advisor for President Jimmy Carter at the time. Another aspect of the Navy that is unmatched in my perspective are the social occasions. From Friday evenings at the officers' clubs to quarterly hail and farewell gatherings, the annual Nurse Corps, Navy, and Marine Corps birthday celebrations, to the pageantry of a dining in, there was no shortage of mandatory fun. The Navy Nurse Corps was established on May 8th in 1908, when a group of 20 nurses were selected as the first female members to ever formally serve in the United States Navy, and they are forever remembered as the Sacred 20. This year, the Navy Nurse Corps will celebrate 113 years since its beginning. Now, when I joined the Navy, I had no idea I'd become my career. I thought if I liked it, I'd take another assignment, and if not, I knew I could always go home. Well, at the end of my initial 3 years, I met with a detailer, or the senior nurse who makes duty station assignments, and she offered me a position as a nurse recruiter in the San Francisco Bay Area. Well, I'd never been west of the Mississippi River, and I'd only ever flown on a plane twice in my life, so this sounded like something I couldn't pass up. As a nurse recruiter for Area 8, my primary responsibility was recruiting nurses to the Navy from the 10 western states, including Alaska and Hawaii. It was a fabulous experience, traveling about a month each quarter to visit various BSN programs, supporting other areas as the Nurse Corps expert, and serving as the face of Navy Nurse Corps to the public. As I neared the end of my tour, again, I wasn't ready to go home, and an overseas adventure was calling me. My next duty took me to Okinawa, Japan, where I worked on a surgical and pediatric ward, and also provided coverage on the psych unit. While the nursing assignments were challenging, the opportunities to travel and experience an entirely new culture were incredible. During the short 18 months that I was there, I was able to travel to Hong Kong, the Philippines, Taiwan, Korea, and mainland Japan several times. The camaraderie among all members of the hospital staff was amazing and led to many lifelong friendships. It was here that I had my first experience with operational readiness, where staff members set up a complete field hospital and we simulated care in a combat situation. I also got to fly on a Marine Corps helicopter, as well as experience exposure to tear gas firsthand. After Okinawa, I wasn't ready to go home yet again, so I accepted reassignment to the Naval Medical Center in San Diego, where I worked in the emergency department. It was here that I truly realized how the Navy Nurse Corps had so thoroughly prepared me to function in any assignment. As a senior lieutenant and then lieutenant commander, I further developed my leadership skills as the shift leader of a crew of nurses and hospital corpsmen. I also successfully completed the requirements for a subspecialty as a certified emergency nurse. After 2 years in the ED, I was reassigned as the charge nurse in the surgery clinic. Our focus was on expanding outpatient care. After a year there, I was given the opportunity to return to the emergency department, and I jumped at the chance. Well, it just so happens that the Navy nurse sent to the clinic as my replacement was quite a handsome dude. The attraction was mutual, and after several weeks, we began to date. 10 months later, we were married. Now, Steve was a single dad with custody of 2 preteen boys, so I always say that I married 3 handsome fellas. When I arrived in San Diego, the old Naval Hospital, which was built in 1922 and known as the Pink Palace due to its pink stucco exterior, was in the process of being replaced by a new state-of-the-art facility. By the time I returned to the ED, construction was nearly complete, and I was part of the relocation crew from the old to the new. Shortly before leaving San Diego, the new hospital was fully operational, and I became a plank owner, or a member of the first group assigned to the newly commissioned facility. The opportunity to be stationed together required that Steve and I transfer across country from San Diego to the Naval Hospital Camp Lejeune in Jacksonville, North Carolina. There, I was charged for an orthopedic and general surgery unit, and then worked as the charge nurse for 5 branch clinics on base. Now, Camp Lejeune is the home of the 2nd Marine Corps Division, and much emphasis was placed on operational readiness. So I was involved with the extensive training of hospital corpsmen who accompany the Marine on deployments to the Fleet Marine Force. While at Camp Lejeune, Iraq invaded Kuwait and the Gulf War was declared. On a Friday evening, I was informed that I was one of 8 nurses assigned to augment the staff on the Naval Hospital ship Comfort, and I would be leaving within the week. Boy, was I pumped. There were daily planning meetings and this flurry of activity in preparation for deployment, but in the end, there were adequate personnel aboard the Comfort, and our small group was not needed. However, I didn't unpack my sea bag for a year, just in case duty called. Nearing the end of my tour at Camp Lejeune, the Nurse Corps selected me for graduate education, where I attended East Carolina University and received a Master of Science as an adult health clinical nurse specialist. For my utilization tour, where I would apply my newly acquired education skills, I returned to Naval Medical Center in Portsmouth, Virginia, where I was the clinical nurse specialist for ambulatory surgery unit. I then transferred to the Nursing Staff Development Department, where I was responsible for orienting newly arrived Nurse Corps officers and coordinating a quarterly physical assessment and trauma course, among other projects. My final duty was at Naval Hospital Charleston, South Carolina, where I was the department head of nursing service. The hospital was transitioning from an inpatient facility to an ambulatory surgery center with increased outpatient services through several branch clinics. The largest command we supported was the nuclear power training facility, where young sailors received their training in nuclear navy. As a department head, I oversaw patient care in the clinics, evaluated medical response to potential emergencies on base and the nuclear reactor simulator, and coordinated health education of the students. As at other commands, I had one more operational readiness exercise with the Marines at Camp Pendleton in California. Here, we participated in an amphibious assault with the helicopters and landing craft storming the beach, and it was quite a sight to see. Though I never had the opportunity to actually deploy during combat, I was ready, willing, able, and well-trained should the need ever arise. Well, you know the saying about how time flies when you're having fun? It seemed like that in a blink of an eye, I had reached 22 years of my Navy career and decided it was time to retire. Remaining in Charleston, I was hired as a civilian nurse for the Naval Health Clinic to help implement the health promotion programs for all beneficiaries. Once again, thanks to the wide experiences that I received as a Nurse Corps officer, I was well prepared for this new role. One of the most fun activities was visiting the base elementary school to tell them about healthy eating. After 2 years, Steve and I decided to move to my hometown of Freeport, Pennsylvania to be closer to my parents. Again, because of my clinical expertise and the graduate education I received as a Navy nurse, I was hired as a faculty at UPMC St. Margaret's School of Nursing, teaching RN students for another 10 years. I finally retired for good in January of 2013. Reflecting back on my Navy career, I'm thankful every day for the decision I made to join the Nurse Corps and the positive impact it had on me, from lifelong friendships to careers and educational opportunities, to the availability of healthcare, to the financial security in my retirement. Well, there are many, many more stories I could share, but I'm about out of time. However, before I close, I want to encourage anyone to visit the Women in Military Service for America Memorial that's located in Arlington National Cemetery in Washington, D.C., either in person or visit their website. Its purpose is to honor all women, estimated at more than 3 million, who have served in the United States military since the American Revolution. Here you'll find films and displays and many more stories of over 290,000 servicewomen who have registered with the memorial. Another place to visit while at Arlington is Section 21, sometimes known as the Nurses Section. It's the resting place of 653 nurses who heroically served in the U.S. Armed Forces. Here you'll find a beautiful 11-foot-tall marble statue representing the spirit of nursing, which was erected in 1938 and rededicated in 1971 to commemorate the devoted services by Army, Navy, and Air Force nurses to the country and to humanity. Finally, I want to share something I read in the Navy Nurse Corps Association newsletter recently. It was related to shared professional and patriotic core values among generations of Navy nurses, but how they're formed by different life experiences. It pointed out that those of my generation served in peacetime and war, whereas many of the newest nurses have never known the United States that hasn't been at war. As I consider the many military nurses that I have personally known who have served during both peace and wartime, Sharing the Navy's core values of honor, courage, and commitment across generations are the ties that bind us as a corps, past, present, and future. To all military nurses from all branches who have served, are currently serving, and will serve in the years to come, I salute you. And during these unprecedented times, I must recognize the millions of nurses around the world facing unimaginable challenges while working the front lines in this pandemic war on COVID. You are true heroes for humankind, and I thank you for your service. Again, I'm honored to be part of Soldiers and Sailors program to honor military nurses during the 2021 Women's History Month. Your time and attention have been greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Donna. It was a pleasure having you with us today, and thank you for your service. It was great to have that personal perspective of service in the Nurse Corps and the Navy Nurse Corps. And at this time, we're actually now going to shift to more of a historical perspective, all right? And we're going to have two more panelists, starting with Jake Wynn. Jake Wynn is the Director of Interpretation at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. Jake is a 2015 graduate of Hood College in Frederick, Maryland, where he received his bachelor's degree in History and Communications Arts. Wynn has previously worked with the Heart of the Civil War Heritage Area, the Tourism Council of Frederick County, and Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park. He is currently stationed at the Clara Barton Missing Soldiers Office Museum in Washington, D.C. He writes independently on the history and culture of Pennsylvania's anthracite coal region at his blog, Winning History, and he is a founding contributor to the Pennsylvania in the Civil War blog. Thank you, Jake, and please take it away.
All right, thank you so much, Tim, and thank you so much, Donna. That was just an amazing walkthrough through your career, and I think a great place to start this evening. Now we're going to kind of pivot backwards, go back to kind of the origins of military nursing during the American Civil War. I do work for the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, which is dedicated to telling the story of the origins of military medicine, of modern military medicine and modern emergency medicine that comes out of our nation's bloodiest conflict. Our museum, which you can see the logo on the left there, is located in Frederick, Maryland, in the historic heart of the Civil War in Maryland. Smack dab in the middle between Gettysburg, Antietam, Harper's Ferry, Baltimore, and Washington, a city with a deep history of Civil War medicine, where thousands of soldiers were cared for after the Battle of Antietam. And in 2015, we opened the Clara Barton Missing Soldiers Office Museum, which is actually where I'm located right now and coming to you live from today, which is located in the heart of downtown Washington. We're about 2 blocks north of the National Archives. And this is the boarding house space restored where Clara Barton lived during the Civil War era and where she opened a missing soldiers office in the aftermath of the Civil War. So this is a really important place, an important location to understanding the story of the angel of the battlefield, Clara Barton. We'll talk a little bit more about her in just a bit. As part of our institution, we do talk quite a bit about the origins of military nursing. It's something that comes out of the Civil War, and the consequences of such a large conflict are going to mean that the Civil War is really going to shape American healthcare. But before we get to the American Civil War, we have to step back a few years to the Crimean War, a conflict that is going to have immeasurable consequences in reshaping emergency medicine, not only in Europe, but also in the United States. And someone who plays a really important role in military nursing and in military medicine, and kind of medicine writ large, is the young woman you see on the left there, Florence Nightingale. A name that I'm sure you're all very familiar with, and a volunteer nurse who's going to go and serve with the British Army during the Crimean War, which takes place in the mid-1850s, fighting between the British, the French, the Russians, the Turks on the Crimean Peninsula. A conflict that doesn't really have too many long-standing consequences, kind of a disaster for pretty much everybody involved, especially from a medical perspective. When Nightingale arrived at British Army hospitals in and around the Crimea, she found a horrible situation. British soldiers, wounded and sick, living in fetid conditions, hospitals that were dirty, dark, dank places. And Nightingale realized very quickly that she needed to bring a new approach to military medicine and to nursing as a result of that as well. And so she is going to install some reforms that are going to change the design of military hospitals and are going to ensure that hospitals become no longer these dark, dank places where soldiers go to die, but instead are clean, bright, well-ventilated spaces where soldiers would go to recover from their wounds, recover from their illnesses and diseases. So Florence Nightingale becomes a hero not only in Europe, but also across the pond here in the United States. And a lot of her reforms are going to really shape how military medicine is going to evolve over the course of the American Civil War. One of her most important reforms is going to be the establishment of military hospitals that are designed for ventilation and cleanliness, what are known as pavilion-style hospitals. One last note I will say on Florence Nightingale is we think of her as a military nurse, or the lady of the lamp, as she became known. She was really well known as a statistician and someone who was very good with numbers and understanding data. And that is going to be something that is going to be really, really important during the American Civil War as well. But as we pivot forward and talk about someone here that is very important to what we talk about here at the museum, a little bit about Clara Barton. And I think Clara Barton, not only because I'm working and broadcasting from the place where she lived during the Civil War era, but Clara Barton is actually a really good person to look at to understand kind of where nursing was or wasn't at the beginning of the American Civil War. And we think of Clara Barton, you can see her photograph there, taken during the Civil War. We think of Clara Barton as a battlefield nurse, someone who braved bullets and cannons to go out onto the battlefield and provide nursing care. But she, like countless thousands of other women who are going to fulfill nursing roles during the Civil War, she had no formal nursing training. In fact, nursing as a job didn't really exist at the outbreak of the American Civil War because it wasn't necessary for to have large numbers of trained nurses because hospitals, as we know them today, did not yet exist. The consequences of all of these men going in uniform and serving in the armies of the Union and the Confederacy, and consequently, with the lack of knowledge of germ theory and how disease worked, soldiers became very sick. Epidemics of diseases such as typhoid fever, diarrhea is the biggest killer in the Civil War. Other illnesses are going to spread widely, and disease is going to be the biggest killer of Civil War soldiers. And so we need somewhere to treat all of these thousands of soldiers who are ill, and then ultimately in the aftermath of battle, who need a place to recuperate and recover. And so hospitals are going to begin to be established all across the North and the South as the Civil War escalates in 1861. And this is going to require a large outset of personnel to care for all of these people. And initially, nursing is going to be performed by mostly men, many of them actually enlisted in the army and serving as soldiers who may have become ill and then are beginning their recovery and then are going to be turned over to kind of care for their comrades in the hospital. So they're not trained nurses either, but they are men in uniform. As the Civil War escalates and the need for manpower at the front lines escalated more and more as each week and month went by, there is more and more of a push to bring women into the medical workforce. And Clara Barton is a good representation of this. The beginning of the war in 1861, she's living here in Washington, D.C., and she is striving to assist in the war effort in any way she can. She gathers supplies, she delivers those supplies to Union soldiers here in the nation's capital. But she very quickly wants to go out to the front lines, go out and provide care to soldiers at the front. And she is receives pushback at every step in the way, mostly because she was a woman, and a woman of propriety, as many 19th century American men believed. They should be nowhere near the battlefield. Though maybe have loose morals, women who just want to be near men. This kind of ideology was very common amongst the military chain of command. And so Clara Barton and many other women as well are pushing and saying and making their case that we are here, we are a capable workforce, we in many cases can be trained to do this sort of work, and we can also relieve this manpower crisis. We can go in and step into these hospitals and provide this care. And so Clara Barton is never going to receive formal nursing training, but she is going to be like countless thousands of other nurses who are going to provide care regardless of that, going to volunteer their services. Now, to get to more of a formalized nursing training, we'll step in, to another famous Civil War nurse, Dorothea Dix. Dorothea Dix is someone who had training before the Civil War, worked amongst mental hospitals and as a reformer trying to make mental health care better in the United States. And she is going to form the first kind of formation of Army nurses. And she's going to oversee the establishment of these Army nurses, the training in some cases of these Army nurses, and ultimately the distribution of these nurses to Union Army hospitals throughout the war zones. And Dorothea Dix, she kind of gets lots of nicknames thrown around about her. She's nicknamed the Dragon because she is very forceful. She also had very exacting standards for who could be a nurse under her watch. And so she is really the kind of pressing force behind getting women trained to become nurses and serving in Union Army hospitals. And this idea about these trained nurses and having kind of a hierarchy for these nurses to go into these hospitals. They have a set list of jobs that they are supposed to do. They fit into, again, kind of the management system of these military hospitals, and that evolves over the course of the Civil War. But she is crucially important to establishing military nursing and beginning the process of creating a system by which women will work in the medical workforce within the military for the first time in an organized fashion in American history. There's a great illustration here from 1862 that I'm going to pivot to next. And that shows, as I draw to a close here, that shows kind of the variety of work that nurses were doing during the Civil War, North and South. Now, the two nurses that I did discuss do both serve for the North, but nursing and women nursing in Confederate hospitals is very common as well, although not in the same kind of organized sense as a system such as Dorothea Dix put in place. But this illustration is from September of 1862. I love it because it does show the variety of work that women are doing in these Civil War hospitals or to support these Civil War hospitals. In many cases, and we can see a Catholic nun is going to be participating in this illustration here, and Catholic orders of women were involved from the very beginning of the war in nursing care on the battlefield and in hospitals as well. But women in their roles in these hospitals, oftentimes they're going to be in charge of distributing food, kind of taking care of these soldiers from a mental and emotional kind of standpoint, writing letters home for these soldiers, overseeing, making sure they're getting the proper diet, and carrying out the physician's orders for each of the patients in their wards. So I love this illustration in particular because it shows that variety of roles that nurses will play during the course of the American Civil War. And this really sets the stage for what we're going to be talking about a little bit later in this program. This sets a basis for what nursing is going to be in the years after the Civil War. So the Civil War really brings about nursing in a military sense and in a civilian sense, brings it into kind of this proto-modern state where we have established hospitals, now we have trained nurses, and this is going to set the stage for what nursing is going to become in the 20th century, in the decades after the American Civil War. But I know we have a few more items to talk about specifically with Civil War nursing, so I will turn it back over to you, Tim.
Thank you, Jake, for that great historical perspective about the Civil War. For those out there, remember you can submit questions if you're watching on Facebook. You can just make a comment with a question in the comment section, or if you're watching on YouTube, you can submit via email to soldiersandsailorspittsburgh@gmail.com. With that, we have one more panelist, and we're going to turn it over now to Michael Kraus. Michael Kraus is the curator of collections at Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hall and Museum. He is a well-known military historian, and he has authored several Civil War books, including a chapter in the Civil War in Pennsylvania, The African American Experience, analyzing the photographic presence of African American Pennsylvanians in the Civil War. He has also been tapped as a consultant for numerous films and documentaries, and I've had the pleasure of working with Mike for many years here at Soldiers and Sailors and have learned such a great deal from him. It's such an honor to work with him, and it's my pleasure now to turn it over to Mike. So Mike, take it away.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Donna, for your service and your wonderful presentation, and Jake as well. I really need to get down and see your museum. It's a fantasy for me. When that place was discovered, it was just enlightening. So you'll see me down there one time in the near future. So I'm going to kind of pick up the ball in the Civil War, and I'm going to talk a little bit about hospital situations. And it's not just women. Jake did a good job of outlining how women entered into that theater, but primarily it was men. And what you're going to find as nurses, or what we would think of as a medical nurse today, those that are assisting surgeons or doing medical work, were called hospital stewards. And those were soldiers, enlisted soldiers. You see a manual there on the left-hand side. They assisted wounded, they assisted doctors in surgery, they ran the commissary, they oversaw patient care, and they oversaw the duties of women in their wards. And many women were involved, not just Clara Barton, but you see here is a nurse whose name was Anna Morrison Holstein, kind of similar to Clara Barton in age and in the duties that she performed, although she didn't quite live under the battlefield conditions that Barton did. But she later authored a book about her experiences in the Civil War. And you're going to find primarily that these women are who come to the service or come as nurses are upper middle class women who volunteer their time, come out of their homes, and work changing bandages, writing letters home, sitting beside wounded soldiers and comforting them, keeping the wards clean and air flowing through them. Air was a big therapy in those days to keep fresh air coming into the wards. But another way that women were involved, and this again is not military, but it aided in the military, was there was an organization called the United States Christian Commission, which was headed by men, but beneath it, in accompanying them and managing quite a bit of the business of the Christian Commission were women. And primarily, there was a grassroots effort to furnish to the Army much needed supplies that the Army didn't provide in any great numbers. And it's shocking to think that the Army didn't provide enough bandages, enough medicine, enough linens, clean shirts, underwear, and those kind of things. And this was picked up by the United States Christian Commission, and primarily women were the makers of a lot of these goods that eventually ended up in hospitals and in the care of wounded men. And there were these fundraising events called sanitary fairs, and these sanitary fairs happened in many of the largest cities in the country: New York, Boston, Chicago, Cleveland, Buffalo, Philadelphia, St. Louis, and in Pittsburgh. And these were, I can only say they're akin to a country fair. There were many different pavilions and in sites you could go see. You could see antiquities, you could see floral displays, you could see homemaking goods. The fairs lasted a couple weeks, and you paid to go see it. And all the money that was raised at the fair was donated, especially towards buying supplies for hospitals and wounded soldiers. And what you see here is a a box that we have in our collection at Soldiers and Sailors. The box is on the right-hand side. It's kind of traveled through time, so it's a little. It was never meant to be this permanent. But you see the box, and it has glued to it a lot of little trinkets like shells or ferns and curiosities. And inside of it were all these medical supplies, including on the left, there's a little beaker tipped over, and there are 2 human teeth that were once glued to the outside of that. For what, I don't know, but they were part of this. But this was one of the things that was raffled off during the sanitary fair in Pittsburgh, and it was purchased by Samuel Clark, a man named Samuel Clark, for his daughter. And these fairs were tremendously successful in not only raising money, but in having this vehicle for women to contribute to the war effort. So we move on then up to World War I, and well, we're actually going to see that the Army Nurse Corps come into being in 1901. And as Donna said, the Navy Nurse Corps came into being in 1908. And this is the first real military positions that women were able to come into the service in. In World War I, in 1917, there were 600 active duty nurses in the armed services. And by the end of the war, 1918, there were 22,000. So you see here, and you can also see by the posters, that there's a great drive to bring women nurses into the military theater and to provide much needed help in the hospitals. Now, they wouldn't serve in the front lines. They would serve in field hospitals, which were back from the front lines. They would serve in hospitals that were in cities. And not only did they care for wounded men, but they also cared for wounded civilians or orphaned children. They really left their mark as caretakers and humanity. There was also another component, another way to get into the nursing arena, and that was through the Red Cross. And you see the Red Cross worker here on the left. And these women they traveled overseas. They actually came overseas and provided coffee, donuts, refreshments to soldiers who were pulled out of the front lines and were coming back to get some rest. The Red Cross workers were there to help them. Some of those Red Cross workers would eventually go into the Nurse Corps, but for the most part, they were just there to aid. And they also, back in the States, the Red Cross was not only Red Cross, but many women's civic organizations were instrumental in raising money to provide ambulances that would be sent overseas and used in the theater of war. The 20th Century Club, which is it's just actually gone out of business in the past few years, located in Oakland, was one of those organizations. In 1917, they raised enough money to send 2 ambulances to the war effort. So as we move to the next area, we are going to look at World War II. And at the time of Pearl Harbor in 1941, there were only 12,000 active duty Army Nurse Corps personnel. But that training was expedited to the point where 27,000 women were brought on board to act as nurses. In total, by the end of the war, there were 74,000 in all areas, including surgical hospitals, rehab, and others. And you also had nurses entering into the flight arena. There were nurses that were flight nurses who flew on aircraft that were transporting wounded soldiers from the theater of war, either back home or to larger hospitals. And they were on board and on planes. And you see here that nurses were actually landing landing craft. This is at Normandy a few days after the original landing, and they were instrumental in setting up these large field hospitals. Again, they weren't going to be in too close to combat, but they were just far enough away that the casualties coming in were fresh and in great need of help. And then after they were treated at the field hospitals, they would be removed to larger hospitals, again, where there'd be a large nurse corps contingent to help them. You will have, there's one important nurse that I'd like to feature, and her name was Frances Slanger. Oh, here's a surgical nurse. Let me back up. Oh, here's Frances Slager. Frances Slager was an Army nurse, a lieutenant. She was an immigrant from Poland. She was in the first group of nurses that went to Europe. And in October of 1920, or I'm sorry, October 21st, 1944, she wrote a letter to Stars and Stripes, and the letter talked about how hard the conditions were, living outside in tents, taking care of the guys. But she had very high praise for the men who were just really concerned about their buddies and getting back, and she was just amazed at their spirit and their willingness to in their youth, I should say. Their youth is more than anything. But on October 21st, she mailed that letter to Stars and Stripes, and later in the day, she was killed in an artillery barrage. And she is the only nurse, American nurse, that was killed in combat in World War II. There were other nurses who were POWs. Many nurses, of course, died from other causes, but she was killed directly as a result of hostile shell fire. And to honor her, a hospital ship was named the Frances Y. Slanger hospital ship. And what you see here on the right is a model of that ship in our collection at Soldiers and Sailors that was made by a German prisoner of war and given to an Army nurse in Europe who lived in Pittsburgh the rest of her life, and she donated it to our collection. Can we go ahead to the next slide? So we also have in our collection, and this is a way we look at further conflicts, and we just don't have the time to talk about everything here. But this is a fatigue blouse worn by Major Lois Shirley, Lieutenant Colonel, Army Nurse Corps, retired. She was a nurse in Vietnam. She served in a hospital in Saigon. So again, she wouldn't have been in the forward hospitals, but she was receiving wounded and taking care of wounded back in Saigon. So there are so many different opportunities for women in the service today, as Donna pointed out, and it all stems from the early beginnings that we looked at here. And I think I'm going to drop back to Tim so that we can look at some questions.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Very interesting. Yes, we do have some great questions lined up here. Let me see what I can find here. My first question I find here is, and thank you all for submitting these. The first one looks like it is directed at Donna. And Donna, this question asks, what were the significant modern day changes you witnessed as a practitioner during your tenure as a nurse?
Part of it was when I was stationed in San Diego and moving to the new hospital. It was a transition from the paper charting to computer charting, so that we had ready access throughout the entire facility, which evolved into ready access from one command to the next when a service member was transitioning from one duty station to the next. That was a big development as such. A lot was related to IV fluids and administration tools and techniques and things. So there were many, many changes, but I'm also a fairly modern nurse. So it wasn't that antiquated to the current times.
Thank you, Donna. Here's a question for our historical experts. Did we have nurses during the Revolutionary War? Or were they mostly the camp followers? I don't know if Jake or Michael want to take a stab at that one.
Jake, do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, there are, of course, women who are doing nursing work. I think what the big difference is that, again, it's not organized. There's not a training regimen. It is very much of, and this refers to another comment that I saw about, the training of women nurses during the Civil War, is that a lot of nurses did have hands-on experiences on the home front, at home, nursing family members. I saw that this comment referred to, midwives as well, and that is very, very true. And in earlier conflicts, Revolutionary War, War of 1812, Mexican-American War, yes, there are women who are nurses, who do nursing care, but again, it doesn't fall into that idea of training, of doing it in an organized fashion, and have it actually integrated into the military hierarchy, which you start to see in the Civil War. And that's something that is going to evolve and develop in the years and decades after the Civil War.
Okay, thank you, Jake. This one also probably is directed towards more up your alley here. Let me start with a little preface here from this one. While the antebellum North had an active women's right movement, there was no such movement in the antebellum South, which was strictly grounded in particularly in whites' men's control over women and African Americans. Are there any accounts of Southern nurses who began to assert demands for equal citizenship, specifically for white women based on their Civil War experience?
I did see this comment in question, and was eager to talk about this. You're exactly right. I think that was Niels that dropped that comment.
Yeah, Niels Skirta was
Yep.
who asked that.
Yeah, no, you're right. There is no a kind of equivalent movement to women, the women's rights movement in the North, especially in New England and upstate New York. There is no equivalent to that in the antebellum South, nor is there one really in the South during the Civil War and in the years that follow. The nursing care that is going to be administered, and the women who are going to step up and kind of step into these roles that were traditionally held by men before, are doing so out of military exigency, not so much out of a drive to assert their rights, to gain more footing in terms of stepping towards suffrage or towards citizenship. It is very much so they are stepping into those roles in order to assist this cause, to allow more men to serve at the front lines, to assist in any way that they can, but they're not necessarily attaching demands for citizenship or additional rights to that service, which many Northern nurses do explicitly do. Clara Barton being a kind of a famous one among many nurses who serve in the Civil War, who on the Northern side, who after the war are going to assert and demand that there be some recompense and some additional rights added. And that is not seen by and large in the South.
Thank you, Jake. Here's a question directed for Michael. In the Civil War, were there any important figures in Pittsburgh for the women that were doing their role as nurses during the war? So was there any connections to Pittsburgh from nursing in the Civil War that you know of, Michael?
There was a hospital here in Pittsburgh, but I have to say I just don't know enough about it, and maybe Jake can pick up there because we talked briefly about that in our rehearsal.
Yeah, this is one that I would recommend giving the National Museum of Civil War Medicine a follow on social media. So shameless plug, drop that in. We are actually working on transcribing a collection at the museum that is the letters and paperwork for an assistant surgeon who served at the hospital in Pittsburgh. Having looked at these letters, they haven't gone through the full vetting process yet to go through kind of multi-check on the transcription, but there is some really good material in there about Civil War medicine in Pittsburgh in 1864 and 1865 that we'll be putting out online in the very near future. So stay tuned. There's some really, really good material in this collection.
Thank you, Jake. I think there was one other here that I thought was kind of interesting. Has anybody read about Kate Cummings' fight to get herself and nurses more responsibility in Southern hospitals during the war? She is my historical heroine. I am not familiar with Kate Cummings. Is there any of our panelists? Jake, back to you, it looks like.
Yes. She's one of the more famous Confederate nurses. Does play a role kind of in the aftermath of some battles in the Western Theater in Tennessee, Battle of Shiloh, Corinth as well. And what I will say, I think from kind of Confederate nursing perspective is we know a lot about some of the Confederate nurses because they do write some fantastic accounts of their service during the conflict. Some of the challenges that they faced in these Confederate military hospitals, the logistical challenges that the Confederates faced from a medical perspective as well because of the blockade and the military situation. But Kate Cumming, yeah, we do talk quite a bit about her at the museum, talk about her and share some of her stories. But I will recommend looking around online. I believe one of her books is available in the public domain on archive.org, HathiTrust, Google Books. And she is a character definitely worth checking out.
Okay. Actually, I just would like to end with one question to Donna. I just want, I think, to come full circle here for a question for Donna. And this is just a personal question. You touched on it very briefly, but what got you interested in joining the Navy? I know you said the uniforms. You like the uniforms, but was it something that you thought of as a little girl? Were you thinking this was going to be your future, or did it? What sparked it? You to join?
When I was 5 years old, I received a Nancy Nurse doll for a Christmas present, and she was about 2 feet tall and all dressed in the cape and the hat, and I was very military in her appearance. And it's something that stayed with me for my entire life. I mentioned about my father's influence as well, and learning about the war and his experiences and driving that patriotic feeling. I hadn't really considered the Nurse Corps until a friend had talked about it. And so from the standpoint of serving my country, the professional aspects of nursing that could be advanced that I learned through talking with the recruiters, it was just something that I wanted to try. And as it evolved, each duty station provided me with more and more opportunities that I don't feel that I would have had as a civilian nurse. And so from the early days as a youngster, I was destined to be a nurse. And a Navy nurse is something more special.
Well, once again, thank you very much for your service. And thank you for joining us this evening. And thank you to all our panelists, Michael and Jake. Great, I think, combination of personal perspective from Donna and historical perspective from Jake and Michael. Thank you for everyone and their questions. Really appreciate those. If you would like to learn more about Jake Winn in the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, please visit civilwarmed.org. And of course, if you would like to learn more about Soldiers and Sailors, please visit our website, soldiersandsailorshall.org, where you can sign up for our email list to learn more about future events. You can also learn how to donate to the museum and join our Friends program. As I mentioned in the beginning of the program, this is just the start when it comes to our virtual programming provided by Soldiers and Sailors. Next month, we will focus on the caretakers during the Vietnam War. As a note, this will take place on April 8th, 2021 at 7 p.m. Thursday, April 8th will be the program. And April is actually the 46th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. And we'll be actually talking to a laboratory technician and a chaplain, a Marine chaplain. So a little bit of a different perspective on the Vietnam War coming from what we're calling the caretakers of the war of the time period. And like I said, that takes place on Thursday, April 8th. That'll bring us to the end of our program. I would like to say one last thank you to all of our participants and all of the guests who join us. And we all look forward to you two virtually seeing you next month. Take care.